Hello, welcome to the next installment of Freestyle Torah. Still, I can't remember the name. Where we're going through from the beginning of the Torah. We started in Genesis chapter 1. We are now up to Genesis chapter 11. So it's right at the end of the second Pashas Noach, which speaks about Noach, Noah and the flood, etc. The last couple of lectures have been about. So it's just to finish this one off. It's just chapter 11 we've got to finish off, and this is the story of the people of the Tower of Babel, right? So let's get into it. The whole land was one language, dvorim achodim, and one devorim, one words, literally, or uniform words it translates here, right? And Rashi points out some very, very key ideas here. What was this one language they all spoke? Was Lashon HaKodesh, the holy tongue, right? So all 70 nations were at this point speaking with the Lashon HaKodesh, that one unifying language, the root language. We're going to see when we have the other languages being expressed and brought into existence at the end of this story. Right, the idea of number 1 and number 70 is number 1 represents the idea of a unity. The number 7 represents the 6 directions plus the point which unifies them together. Right, so the 7 days of the week. It's it's breaking up time into parts, into pieces. Right, that's what the 7 days of the week are, or the 7 colors of the rainbow. You're taking that unified white light and you're splitting into the 7 main constituent colors of the rainbow, right? So that's the idea of the number 1 and the number 7. And number 70 is just 10 times. You're taking the number 7 and you're expanding it into more of a physical expression, right? So whenever you're going from the units, they're more core ideas. And when you go into the tens, they're more of extrapolations and breaking down expressions of the units. And then we go into the hundreds, that's the full expansion. And then you get to the thousands, that's basically like talk about a whole new dimension. Okay, and that's why when we mentioned in one of the previous lectures, that's why the letter Aleph, right? Aleph is 1, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The Aleph is 1, but it also is the word Elef. Elef means 1,000, because once you go from 1 to 999, that's a whole expansion of the 3 different dimensions of reality, right? And then you get to 1,000, then you talk about something completely new where you just start it from the beginning again, but on your new paradigm. Okay, so they're all speaking this one language called Lashon HaKodesh, and we're going to see it gets split into 70 languages later, right? And we have a look at the Rashi here. He says that they came with one scheme. That's a very good word. It's taken me about 15 seconds approximately to come up with that translation. Yeah, excellent word. They came with one scheme. Literally, Eitzah usually means advice, but it's advice, advising each other what to do. So that is a scheme essentially, right? And they said, how can God just choose the high words for himself, and we're just stuck here on the lower levels? Let's go to the heavens and we'll do war with him. What's it mean? Achodim can either mean a unified scheme, or it can mean dvarim achodim, words which go against the one of the world, the one that they are rebelling against that entity which is called the yochid, the only, or the soul, S-O-L-E. Let's see here, one who's a oneness of in his essence, right, as opposed to anything else which is which can be part of a category. Dovar acher dvarim achodim omru achas elef v'tar noi shonim erikim esmedek shem shas mabel boy v'nasel ismichos. Another meaning can be read dvarim achodim, sharp words, right? And that's how one version reads the Rashi. Or from Machodim, they make it one. Maybe it's like they made the whole of time into one until that year, 1,656 years after the creation of Adam, right? They made it into just one process. Yeah, every 1,656 years, the sky falls, and that's how you get the mubble, the flood. So therefore, in another 1,656 years, it'll happen again. Okay, so we'll come back to that. Let's just go through the whole chapter, and then we'll speak about some ideas. And they found a place in the east, in the land of Shinar. Right, Shinar is Babel, Babylon. Right, hence the Tower of Babel. It's called Shinar Sheninaru Shom Mesei Mabul. The people who died in the Mabul were shaken there because it's a very low-lying place. So basically, the people who drowned in the Great Flood were basically all washed up there. Right, that's why it's called Shinar. Right, and Rashi says it's a place which could hold all of them. So it's very interesting hints about what the real story is based on these Rashis here. He's giving us a lot of hints here, and we'll see how it all comes together, hopefully. And one person said to his friend, "Let us go and make bricks and mortar." Right, and they said, "Come on, let's get ready. Come on, everyone together. Let's go and build a city and a tower, and the head of the tower should be in the heavens. We'll make for ourselves there a name, lest we get spread out over the land." So that could be according to the meaning of that they thought that the world was on a cycle of destruction. Right, there was going to be floods again, so let's go and build a nice big tower holding up the world to make sure it doesn't flood. Obviously, this cannot be taken on the literal level. I mean, the translations are literal, but you can't take it on the plain meaning. What on earth are they thinking? Are they stupid enough to think they could climb up and support the sky? That makes no sense, because the sky doesn't have it's not tangible, right? And these are people who are very, very clever, and they knew how the world worked, right? As opposed to the secular way of looking at the world. They look at the previous generations as the cavemen just coming out of the cave and just discovering fire and things like that, right? And then as time goes on, they become more sophisticated. In Torah thinking, it's the other way around. Adam was one of the greatest men who ever lived. He was absolute perfection. He knew everything. He could see from beginning of time to the end of time. He transcended this world to an extent, right? And people were very, very powerful. They could have fixed the whole world for the first 10 generations, as we spoke. That's why they lived very long times, because they were almost at that stage of living forever. They just had to rectify a small amount of the world to get there. But after they failed, there was a flood, and then mankind became much more limited. But still, you're talking about some very great people in terms of their wisdom here. I think we might even see a hint in one of the verses, possibly. We'll see. But we're going to explain exactly what's going on. Right? So, interesting. 3 things here, right? Let's build a city and a tower, and at the top of the tower, doesn't say what they're going to do. We'll make a name for ourselves. Okay? And now this is where it gets very interesting. God came down to see what was going on with the tower and with the city and the tower, which people were building. And what does God say? They're one unified nation and one language for all of them. And this is what they're starting to do, right? Right? And now it's almost that they will not be denied or withheld from them everything which they're planning to do, right? If I don't stop them, they're going to succeed. So that's crazy. So you clearly see they're not just making a physical tower to prop up the heavens. They're doing something very deep here, right? On the spiritual level, right? Let's go down, right? So what's the plural here? God was speaking with his Beis Din, right? From his humility, right? Let's go down and let us confuse and mix up their languages in order that each one cannot hear what his friend's saying. So interesting Rashi here. One of the builders will end up asking for a brick, and the other one doesn't understand him. He brings earth or mortar, right? The cement, and this one says, "Hey, what are you doing?" Yeah, I asked for a brick, and he goes and they start quarreling. He smashes him in his head, right? He cracks his skull. Okay, interesting. And so God basically did that, and the languages got mixed up. That's where you get the 70 languages emanate from this story, right? And God did exactly what they tried to avoid. They tried to avoid being spread out over the whole world. They wanted to remain unified, right? But God said, no, I'm going to make you 70 languages. You're going to have arguments, and I'm going to spread you out through the whole world, right? And obviously they stopped building the city. Interesting. Doesn't speak about the tower anymore, just says they stopped building the city. Maybe that's the idea of the original unity of the city first. Right? They even stopped that. So they couldn't even do the first stage, because first they built the city and then the Migdal, then the tower. And that's why the name of the city was called Bovel, because that's where Hashem Bolal, it's a similar word to Bovel, similar root. God mixed up the languages of the land, of the people, and from there God spread them out through the whole earth, right? Okay, so let's go into some ideas here. What's the idea? What exactly were they planning to do here? The idea is like this. So they wanted to make a unifying ideology which would keep everyone together. The United Nations. You see the picture of the United Nations, or the EU of the United Nations. I think one of their emblematic pictures, or their icon or something like that, is the Tower of Babel. The idea of all the nations coming together, unified around one big tower, one big ideology, right? So this is in a strong, stark contrast to the men of the flood, the generation of the flood. Now remember, we mentioned last time that there were certain generations which kept getting reincarnated in different generations, and they're all essentially the same idea. God's testing them with the same thing, and eventually the only one which passed the test were the Jewish people in the generation of the desert. When they went out of Egypt, they willingly accepted the Torah. So we said that the generation of the flood didn't accept whatever the Torah would have been in that form. So God gives them the immense God's shafam is God's divine flow, right? So that divine flow has to have a vessel to be able to hold it, and the people of the time of the flood were not able to hold it because they weren't prepared to be the ones. I'm an unwilling vessel, so it's basically like you've got a cup. I don't want to accept everything, so it closes the lid, and the flow or the liquid or the divine energy is trying to get in, but it's refusing to absorb it, so therefore it spills everywhere and it floods everywhere. That's the idea of that. Right? In the Tower of Babel, as well, in this story here, we've got a similar idea. They were meant to get the Torah, whatever the form the Torah would have taken in this situation. And the idea of God coming down, a unified people. We see a reflection of this, that the Jewish people, just before receiving the Torah, they were one people. Vayichan Shem Yisrael Neged Har, and the nation encamped. Vayichan is a singular a verb, right? It says, and he encamped by the foot of the mountain. So you see the idea of unity over there, because to receive the Torah you have to be a unified vessel. Imagine you've got a vessel but it's in 100 pieces, it can't hold anything, so there has to be unity down here. And we spoke about that by the flood. We spoke about the idea of shalom. What is that vessel which can hold blessing? It's called shalom, peace. Peace means the unity and the harmony between all the component parts working together. An individual can't hold everything himself, but if you've got a whole group of people all working in unison, right, and harmony, they can bear the weight of something very great. That's the idea of receiving the Torah. Now, these 70 people, 70 nations, had the potential to do that. They had a total unity, and this was an auspicious time, and they could have done certain rectifications. Unfortunately, just like in time of the men of the generations of flood, they messed it up. They refused to do that. But there's a difference between the generation of the flood and the generation of the Tower of Babylon, or Tower of Babel. We mentioned that we spoke about in quite detail that the people of the flood, what was their problem? Instead of making their spiritual, or the tzura, we called it, the form. Remember we spoke about form and matter, about definitions, ideals, concepts, and the physical clothing of those ideas. Perfection happens when you take concepts and you imprint them on the physical, and now the physical world, or whatever the physical vessel happens to be, a human body, the earth itself, right, or any object, right, is there to express a certain spiritual reality, right? We spoke about the animals, Adam naming the animals. He was showing the spiritual roots of the letters of each word which made up the corresponding animal, right? He revealed them in the animal by looking at the animal and saying, that's your name. You are an aryeh, you are a lion, you are a sus, a horse, right? Because he's tracing back the spiritual roots, and he unified the spiritual source, that's the tzura, the form, the definition, the idea, with the physical manifestation. That means the physical earth material. And by doing that, you're revealing God in the world, because God is God. The way that God reveals himself in the world are through different channels of spiritual divine flow, right? And those divine flows are the names of everything down here. Okay? So when we learn Torah, for example, we're getting in contact with those divine sort of blueprints, or sort of precursors of the physical manifestation, the abstract concepts. Okay. So what did they do wrong in the generation of the flood? We explained that instead of having the forms dominating over the material, they made it the other way around. They said, we want the material, the meaninglessness of the world. We want the water element of the world. Water is formless, right? Water is the thing which gets formed by something else. But they took their water. Yeah, we know that there's 4 elements conceptually: fire, air, water, and earth. Water corresponds to lust, right? It's the idea you just want to be one without boundary. Yeah? Usually the relationship is meant to be of oneness, is a good thing if it's between man and wife. But if it becomes but there has to be some structure. There's a man and a wife, right? But then afterwards, they sort of come together, right, as a oneness. That's the idea of the water. However, if people take on that characteristic of water too much, it spreads and everything becomes one and it becomes a whole, right? And then that's how you have adultery and promiscuity. Yeah, everything. We're all one, sort of very similar to the 1960s, the idea of the hippies. Yeah, everything's free, right? But that the source of their mistake was making their physical element, the material side, dominate over their definitions, their spiritual side, right? Here we've got a different problem. So that you could call the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination of Avera, of sin, right? Sin referring specifically to things connected with interpersonal, intimate relationships. Here it was something different. Here the mistake was somewhere else. It wasn't taking the physical element and trying to dominate over the spiritual. Here, they're trying to cut God out of the picture completely. They're trying to create their new spiritual element. So they wanted a spiritual reality for themselves. They wanted to have ideologies. They weren't just like physical hedonists like the people in the Great Flood. Rather, they wanted to have an ideology. But that ideology, they didn't want to be subjugated to the true source of forms and surah, which is God. So that's why it says in the verse very nicely. Right, let's have a look. Right, in verse 3 here. No, verse 4. Right. Come, let us build a city and a tower and its head in the heavens. Shame. We'll make for ourselves a shame. Remember what the word shame means? We spoke about last time. Shame means a name. Name means the essence of something. So let's make our own essence. So they want to recreate reality in their own corrupt, warped image. Instead of having a true subjugation to the real reality, which is God, and below God, his emanations in the structure which God wants the world to run by, right? The rules of nature, you could say, the spiritual rules of nature, the spiritual concepts, the realm of concepts, and how they get traced down and eventually end up in the physical world in a nice structured way where the world can be unified around that central theme, that central concept, and by doing that, revealing God's existence and power permeates through everything. Very, very deeply connected with the third lecture on this channel, the third of the Keystone Lectures, the reason why God does everything. Right? The idea of the oneness, the unity of God, which is the purpose of creation, to be expressed in the world, so we will experience that amazing unity of God, which is the reality of God. Instead of doing that, they say, no, let's create our own one, right? It sounds a lot like in modern society where we've got all these funny ideologies about, for example, men can be women can be men, right? What's the idea there? But nature's not like that, right? So what's the idea? So no, we want to reform nature in our image. Very nice. God created man and woman, etc. Right? And marriage, you can go even further back. Yeah, marriage is between a man and a woman, right? I did there's certain structures in the higher realms, and they're meant to be revealed and reflected in the physical world, right? We spoke about the idea of marriage in the lecture about marriage, for example. It's meant to reflect a very deep aspects of God's revelations themselves in the world of Atzilus, the different characteristics or attributes to God actually marry each other to bring out this world, so to speak. That means the the two elements bind together. So you've got like we're speaking now, you've got the information, then you've got the physical, the lens to reveal it physically on the physical dimension. That's a marriage between Chomer and Tzura, between form and material. Right? Yeah. So what they do is in modern society, well, the leftist society, I guess you'd call it, or woke, I think they call it, is they want to say, no, it's not good enough for us to rebel against God. We want to rebel against everything God made. We want to recreate the world in our image. We don't want to live by God's rules anymore. We're going to see how they were planning to do that. We'll see how that works. So what they're doing now is, instead of letting their body overtake the true good spiritual element of themselves, that's one way to rebel against God. Just quash the godliness in us. That's what the people in the flood did. Instead, they're making the spiritual itself a new spiritual. They're branching out to a different spiritual source, or attempting to, which is very hard, because ultimately God is the source of everything. Yeah, but as much as they can, at least we can fake it for as long as we can. I guess they were trying to do it absolutely, and God says they might have succeeded if He didn't interfere. How's that possible? So the idea I saw was the way that God relates with the world and reveals Himself in the world happens through many dimensions, through different conduits and channels, right? So these channels can be, on the physical level, it could be the constellations, like the zodiac signs, or the sun and the moon. They're ways that God channels His energy into the world, because obviously God doesn't want to do it directly, because He wants to hide Himself in order that we don't experience Him directly, in order that we've got free will. So God hides His energy through different things. How it works, different discussion, but that's the idea. You go up a level, you've got the angels. They're also the ones who carry out God's will, right? And as you go up until the throne of glory, which is just below the level where God is absolutely recognized as the only true being, right? It all starts from the throne of glory, and underneath it, that's the beginning of the book of Ezekiel, speaks about that. So what's happening here is the people of the Tower wanted to tap into those forces and make those forces, the new rulers of the world. So instead of tracing everything back to the absolute source, which is God, right at the top, theoretically there, if you want to think about it conceptually, they said, oh, okay, and then God channels His a divine flow through different channels. Let's cut God off from those divine channels, and we'll make those divine channels God. We'll make them v'naseh lonu shem. Let's make for ourselves a shame, an essence. It doesn't mean let's make a name for ourselves. Well, we're so famous, we built a tower, right? That's the basic meaning of the verse, yeah? But the deeper meaning of the verse is Nase Lonu, and we should make for ourselves shame, our own essence. We'll create our own essence, which sounds crazy, but God says it could have worked, because the truth is that when God creates the world, these channels are the way that God actually does bring divine energy into the world, and sustenance and abundance, where we can actually exist through that divine flow, right? So they say, okay, let's we'll agree with God on that bit. Yeah, we do need to have the angels, we have to have the constellation stuff, but let's pretend, using it loosely, the word pretend, they're going to do something a bit deeper than that, but let's pretend that is the source of everything. Cut God out of the picture, right? And let's serve that instead. Our own God created in our image, right? So instead of us being created in God's image, we're creating God in our image, our corrupt image, right? It reminds me a bit of Christianity. Okay, no offense intended too much for the Christians who are watching this, but that's the idea. Yeah, they want to make instead of going directly to God, let's serve someone who we feel comfortable with, someone we can relate to. Instead of bringing yourself up to the abstract level, you bring God down to your level. Right? That's essentially what the men of the great of the Tower of Babel were doing. It's very interesting. You can already see the parallels between the men of the flood and the people of the Tower of Babel. Parallels the East and Western worlds, which we speak about quite a lot. The idea of the Western world is the one which cuts God out the picture, right? And it says that God's there isn't a transcendent God. God's part of this world, right? So they're recreating God in their own twisted image. That's the idea of atheism or the deism, right? However you want to do it, or the idea of olam kadmon, the Greeks' idea of a primordial material, or God being part of the world, whatever, right? And that ends up with heresy. Whereas in the Eastern world, you have that's Esav, the Western world. In the Eastern world, you have Yishmael. Yishmael represent the Eastern world, the spiritual ones, the ones who believe in an absolute power. But they say, but we're not interested in that. We're letting our physical desires overpower that. That's why the idea of the Yishmaelim are Shetufezim. They're the ones who go after their lusts and the physical element, right? And they say, oh, we're going to, instead of God telling us, instead of subjugating our will to God's will, and God tells us, be moral, control your bodies, we say, no. We like our bodies, and we're going to make our bodies, our physical desires, dominate over our perception of God, right? So therefore, God's the one who's telling us to be immoral, to do this, to whatever corrupt things the evil people of that side get up to. Of course, there's good and evil in each side. Right? I'm talking about the corruptions here. This is very interesting. Right? And it's very interesting. You see the parallels. Literally, the people of the flood were hedonists. Hedonism, right? Alright, okay, we'll leave it like that. Okay, we're going a bit too off topic here. So we have on one hand, you have the people of the flood were the ones who went after their lust. They made their chomer dominate over the tzura. The people of the Tower of Babel made the tzura dominate over the chomer, but it was a different tzura. We're not having God being in charge. How did they do that? Because they knew Lashon HaKodesh, because they knew this one unifying language. That language allowed them to penetrate. It's not just a physical language, we explained. Right? Adam, who spoke Lashon HaKodesh, the holy language, Hebrew, right? He was able to identify the spiritual source of everything. Other languages don't do that. They only describe a superficial aspect, if even that, right? When this is a hand, what's the word hand got to do with this appendage? The word hand is almost arbitrary, right? It's evolved from different languages, maybe tracing back to Latin somehow, right? Eventually you can trace it back to Hebrew, only after a few corruptions along the way, and twisting the words. Right. That's the idea of other languages. We had the whole lecture about this, about the Holy Tongue. Whereas Hebrew is the language of essence. It's the language of shame, of names, the real names of anything, the essence. So when they wanted to make their own essence, right, it's because they could speak Lashon HaKodesh, because they could speak the Holy Tongue, right? They didn't just speak it; they understood it. They understand the spiritual forces which built this world. So they said, we've got a clever idea. We've got a plan. Let's manipulate those angels or those spiritual forces and reform them in our way. Because remember, God creates the world in a way where reality depends on our free will. That includes we can change reality into good by choosing to bring God into the world, or we can make it evil by cutting God out. God says it's up to you. You form the world the way you want to. The problem is the whole world was unified, right? That means they've got the ability to reach up to the unity of God, or close enough, right? And instead of receiving the Torah, that means God's revelation of the world through and bring that unity into the world, they said, let's create our own Torah, right? Based on the angels and the constellations, and we'll manipulate them using the power, the creative power of Lashon HaKodesh. We'll make the angels do what we want them to do. Instead of listening to God, we'll corrupt the angels, we'll take the zodiac constellations, whatever, however they did it, because we know the language which is the language of creation, and we're going to create the world in the way we want to, and that way we can do what we like, right? As I think it was Aldous Huxley, said, I think he was an atheist, and towards the end of his life, it was Julian Huxley or Aldous Huxley, can't remember, one of the two. They're like the early 1900s, two famous sort of philosophers. He said that the admissions of an atheist, I think it was like a letter or something, right? And the part of it said that the reason why, well, let's see if I can look it up actually. Right, I'll just read it off here. I looked it up here. It's in his essay of Ends and Means. He admitted that his rejection of a religion was not based purely on intellectual, but also moral. I had motives for not wanting the world to have meaning. Consequently, assumed that it had none. Because of his bias, his desire not to have meaning, I assumed it had none, and was able without any difficulty to find satisfying reasons for this assumption. The philosopher who finds no meaning in the world is not concerned exclusively with a problem in pure metaphysics. He is also concerned to prove that there is no valid reason why he personally should not do as he wants to. For myself, the philosophy of meaninglessness was essentially an instrument of liberation, sexual and political. There you go. Amazing. That's literally what's going on with the Tower of Babel, which we said parallels the Western world. It's the idea of atheism as ultimately excuse for liberation from God, basically. Right? So ultimately, they were both aiming for promiscuity, right? Ultimately, but the people of the Great Flood did it directly. Let's just give in to the physical. And when the Tower of Babel people saw that didn't work, so let's make it more of a philosophical thing, and if there's an ideology behind it, maybe we can manipulate the way things work, and now God can't punish us according to their corrupt way of their corrupt scheme. God won't be able to punish us, because we're going to change the way the world works. We're going to take the angels, the ones, the different energy sources, and make them run by themselves without needing input from God. Because we're going to use our power of speech, of Lashon HaKodesh, the holy tongue, to manipulate the world itself at the root, at the core. Right? And God said, well, they've got free will, they're going to succeed. So God says, got to do something about it, I've got to take them away from this. It's like God saying to Adam, out of Garden of Eden, if you eat from the tree of life, you're going to live forever in your fallen state, in your imperfect state, and that will destroy my whole purpose of creation, which is to get people to perfect themselves, and I can give them all the abundance and goodness which I'm intending to, because they deserve it. Same thing's happening here. The people of the tower wanted to make their own reality and cut God out of the picture, and because they were given the power of Lashon HaKodesh, of Hebrew, he had the power of creation itself, right? We see later on Bezalel, the one who built the tabernacle in the desert, right? He had the power to manipulate the letters of creation in order to build a mini universe in the form of the tabernacle where God could reside in, his divine presence could reside in, just like the plan of God himself to reside his divine presence in the whole world. So the world is just a big tabernacle, or the tabernacle is a mini world, a microcosm. We explained this in the one of the Tisha B'Av lectures, or 3-week lectures, I think, one of them. So, by them creating their own shame, their own essence, their own name, their own source of reality, yeah, they had the potential to cut God out of the picture, and then the whole purpose of creation is just going to fail. So God has to interfere, and what does he do? He takes away that ability to speak Lashon HaKodesh. They can't speak it anymore. Not just they can't say the words, but they can't access that reality anymore. And he spreads them around the earth. So instead of them being unified and having that power of unity to recreate the world through that unifying language and the unified people down here, right? God makes them not unified. 70 languages, so they don't have access to that one unifying language. Instead, each nation has their core language now, each one of the 70, right? You could say it's measure for measure, because they wanted to make those different elements, spiritual elements, the new God. So God said, "Oh, so you want to split me up into parts, right? My energy into parts and serve the parts, which is essentially idolatry, right? Right. So, okay, I'll split you up then, right?" So now let's look back at some of the other verses and we'll see some other beautiful ideas. Right. So now we understand why they're one language. Lashon HaKodesh, the Holy Tongue, right? They came with a unified plan. What was it? Let's go up to heaven and wage war with God. That's the idea of fighting against God. God says, if you do good, you'll get good. If you do bad, you'll get punished. Let's fight with him. Yeah, I said, no, we're going to get good even if we don't do good. Right? The second one is Yechido Shel Olam, the idea of the unifier of the world. The Yechido Shel Olam, the one. So they're going against God's oneness, right? God, God is the one of the world. There's nothing else besides God, right? And our job is to show that, become the vessel to reveal that in the world. They were fighting against that. So even though there's two different meanings in the Rashi, they all come down to the same idea. And now we've got the final one, beautiful, yeah, evolution. The world works on nature. How do they actually do it? By saying once every 1,656 years, the world will falter, right? So instead of attributing the Great Flood as a punishment from God, right, because they went after their physical desires, so let's reinterpret it. Let's create a false narrative, a false reality, right? False laws of nature. Yeah, men could be women, right? Essentially, that's what they're doing. Yeah, why? We define what nature is. Yeah, God comes with a flood. No, you don't understand. There's something to do with the universe, the way that the different forces interact. That once every 1,656 years, there will be a flood. They're skewing that. They're detaching nature from God being the one who's in charge of nature. That's what they're doing. Right? So it's all the same idea. It's beautiful. Right? And how did they do it? This is beautiful. Yeah. We see that they chose the land of Shinar, Be'eretz Shinar. Right? So they found a place which can hold all of them. Now the problem with this is Shinar is like a valley. So if you want to build a tower which reaches heaven, what do? You want to save yourself some effort. You go to a tall mountain and start building on top of the mountain. Why do you go to a valley, to lowlands, right? It makes no sense. But now that we understand what they're really trying to do, they're trying to create a new creation in their image. So what you have to do is you have to create the three elements of connection and the spiritual, physical, and the connector. Right? What's the question is, we always speak about the Tower of Babel. Why are we never speaking about the city? The city is the first thing which they did. What is a city? A city is a place where you have numerous houses, numerous families, a plurality of people, lots of different elements, and they come together as a city. It's a unifying concept, a city. Otherwise, it's just lots of individuals and houses. Right? A city means an infrastructure where everyone works together. So they were taking their individuality, the 70 nations, they're working together as one city. And now they are physically united, right? Now let's extend that unity to the heavens, and that is through the tower. That tower is the thing which connects earth with heaven. And what they do at the top, we'll create our own heaven, our own name, our own spiritual source, right? So now we don't have to rely on God anymore. You see what's going on here? It's very similar to the way the body works. The body is made up of multiple parts. You've got fingers, toes, hands, arms, torso, legs, etc., knees, right? And within each of those, you've got different joints, different limbs, sinews. There's thousands or maybe even more parts to the body, right? But they work together as a harmony. That's how the body works. It's harmonious. It's meant to work as one unit. But there has to be something which dictates what the body does. That's the brain, the mind, the spiritual element of the human being. And how does that get transferred from the information instruction source down to the body source? That's through the neck. You can't see here. My neck here. Right, there you go. No one's ever seen my neck before. Right? Right. The neck is the thing that is the Tower of Babel. That is the thing which connects the physical world, the body, with the spiritual world, the head. Right? So basically they had a body, they had a neck, but what's the head? What is their information source? What is their ideology, their philosophy, which is all to do with the head? We'll make it our own one. Instead of God being the head of the world, we'll make our own head. That's what's going on here. And then God said later on, let's mix up the languages, right? Right, and then it says that God scattered them from the face of the earth, and they stopped building the town. Right? Once they were separate, why did it not just say they stopped building the tower? The tower is just a way of connecting this city of unity to the higher world. So they've got their perfect world now. Yeah, we've got a world of peace, of harmony. Right? God can't punish us for that. Right? Maybe in the world to come He can punish us, but in this world He can't punish us because the way we're acting, we're all peaceful with each other, we're all friendly, and God says, "Oh, because you're friendly, I'm not going to destroy you." Right? Even when He did punish them, He didn't destroy them. Right? As I think Rashi points out in one of these Rashis. Right? Maybe we can pick it out. Yeah, here we go. Right? He spread them out over the whole world. And the question is, what's worse? The men of the flood who just went after their lusts, or the people of the Torah, right? These people who the generation of the dispersion, which is the ones who got dispersed after building the tower, right? These people didn't rebel against God on the essence level. These people did. But yet, the ones who didn't rebel against God, they didn't wage war against God. They just went after their lust. They got destroyed, and these ones didn't get destroyed. Why? Because They stole from each other. There was fighting. So basically, that's like the idea that they made their physical element dominate the spiritual one. So there's no unity, right? There's no ideology. It was just like lots of water, just lots of physicality without any guide. That's why they got destroyed, because when, as it says in the verse, Tava Mevakesh Nifrod, when people go after their lusts, that's when people start to break apart. Because I like this thing, you like that thing. Oh, okay. So it's got nothing to do with. There's no unity in that, right? I want to get this because you're taking. You're not interested in letting someone else have it as well. So you have fights over the physical abundance which you're trying to use for yourself, right? So therefore they got destroyed from the world because they were not nice to each other, right? And in the physical world, they were physically not nice to each other, so God was not physically nice to them. But these people, they had love and friendship between them, right? As it says, and so we see that machalokas is a very hated thing in the eyes of God, right? Like we spoke about, what is machalokas? Argument. We spoke about the second day of creation, about the argument was created on the second day, where you've got a split between the high and the lower waters. You've got differences. You've got a spiritual realm and you've got a physical realm now, right? That's what machalokas is. It's the idea of spiritual disconnection, right? Whereas these people, they were unified. So God said, all right, because you cut me out the picture, the spiritual element of creation, when you get to the spiritual world, you'll be destroyed, right? Don't have a place in the world to come. However, the problem is they're being very nice with each other now, right? So if they're giving to each other, they're being nice to each other here, right? They're not going after their lusts, which causes separation. They're clever, right? They said, no, let's be unified, right? And our lusts can come later. Once we've established a new paradigm for creation, then then we can get away with whatever we want in this world, and God can't destroy us, because God uses the law of measure for measure, midah keneged midah. So if we're all nice and giving to each other, God has to give to us. But, right? But we're going to recognize that other forces are things giving to us. So we're going to have the best of both worlds. We'll get the divine flow from God, but we'll cut God out the picture at the same time and let us be promiscuous or do whatever we want in the physical world, as long as we're unified. Remember, always keep that unity. And God said, that's a clever plan. I've got to do something about it, so I've got to split up their unity. Right? That's the idea there. And that's why he says, Vayofetz Hashem Vayachtilu mivloi so'ir. And once they lost their the end of verse 8 here, right? Vayachtilu livnoi so'ir, and they refrained, or they ceased to build the city. Why the city? Why focus suddenly on the city? Because the city was based on the fact that they were unified. There were many different different people, different characteristics, but they were all unified, and that unity was represented by the city. Remember, the city representing the body, where you got multiple parts, and they all joined together as a oneness. When God gave them different languages, and they start fighting with each other, that splits up. They can't build the city anymore. Maybe they could have kept building the tower, but the tower's useless unless you've got the city. And why did the city, right? So, because remember, the tower is just to connect this unified physical element with a new spiritual reality. But it's pointless if you don't have that connection to the physical. It's like a soul with a neck, but the body's all over the place, right? It doesn't work. There has to be a harmony between all those three elements. So why did they decide to build it in a valley, right? Because they were trying to unify the lower world with the higher world. So therefore we're going to take the lowest land, the one which represents the most physical place, the place which conceptually is furthest away from heaven, from the spiritual realm, right? We're going to take this physical realm, and we're going to create a link between the spiritual world and the physical. So we want to make this absolute. So we're going to pick the lowest place on earth as the physical basis for the town, for the city, and the tower. So the tower connects all the way down. So therefore, maybe that's the idea of the immorality and the lust which they're trying to excuse for themselves, possibly. Right? They're trying to get as low as they could into the physical world and make the lowest things also be connected with their new ideology. Yeah, because if they built it on top of a mountain, they could be a bit bad, but it's still on the mountain. You've still got some self-respect. They want to go right to the depths of immorality. So therefore, our new name, our new essence, our new spiritual paradigm has to be the thing which dominates over everything in creation. Cut God out completely, even from the lowest thing, so we can be the most depraved people possible, right? But it's okay, because it's all part of our new structure. Amazing ideas. And of course, this is the idea of communism. What is communism? Right? And we can see this modern sort of like this woke culture is also from the far left. It's based on socialism. It's the idea of what's the word? Globalism. Globalism is the ultimate form of communism. Globalism is literally the Tower of Babel. Right? It's the idea that break down borders. We don't want any borders between countries. That's why all the immigrants go everywhere. Right? Right? Because we don't want any national pride anymore. National pride means this nation's separate from this one. This one has its own characteristics. They're trying to break it down. All unify around one ideology. Right? That's communism. And communism is the most evil ideology. Why? Because the one way you can cut God out of the picture completely, because you're just making a new doctrine. We don't unify around the true reality. We unify against our name, our shame, which we created. The motherland, communism. It's a community which is everything, right? Right. The Medrash says, beautiful idea here, that when people were building up the tower, and a person would fall off the tower. Let's say he slipped and he fell. Does Rashi bring it? No, I don't think he brings it here. It's a medrash somewhere, I think. Yeah. By the way, you can look through all those Rashis there. You can see these ideas coming out in most of the Rashis. I haven't spoken everything out. It's meant to be 35 minutes. This lecture gone over again. All right. The idea of what are we saying? Remind myself. Yes, the Medrash. That's right. Yeah, the Medrash says that when a person fell off the tower, let's say he slipped up, he fell off, he felt his death, then people just shrugged the shoulders, kept going. Someone dropped a brick, and it fell down to the ground and broke. They were all crying, they were tearing their hair out, they were mourning, they were rending their garments. It was a disaster. What's the idea? That's really strange. It's because when you have communism, that individuals are not important anymore. What you've done, instead of having a unity of different people, and through our differences we unite together to reveal God in the world, because ultimately our job is on the individual level to reveal God in the world, but because we're all doing the same purpose, that creates the unity between us. Communism, or collectivism, is a more generic term, forces a unity, and it removes individuality. So people, we don't care if you created the image of God. That's not where we come from. That's not the ideology which we follow anymore. We're creating our own ideology. There's no such thing as an individual. That's the new spiritual paradigm which the men of the dispersion of the generation of the Tower of Babel created. We're creating our own paradigm for reality now. So as individuals, where does the idea of individuality come from? Right? There's no individuality with animals. right? Everything works through clockworks, through patterns, through evolution, right? Humans are just evolved animals. The image of God, what do you mean image of God? No, we're just another species, just a bit more advanced than the monkeys. Right? It's interesting that the Gemara, the Talmud says in Sanhedrin, just reminded me, it said there's three groups at the Tower of Babel, and each one got a different punishment. One of them is they changed into monkeys. Beautiful, huh? Yeah, because they were trying to say, no, the world works through nature, there's an evolution to the world, there's no divine hand in creation, everything can be worked out rationally, right? So God said, oh, so you're effectively saying that we come from monkeys, right? Because that's smaller creatures get to bigger ones, more advanced ones, and we're the most advanced. God says, okay, measure for measure, you're going back to monkeys. You think you're monkeys? You're just the more advanced monkeys, so I'll make you monkeys, right? Very interesting. So, right? So this is sort of like turning the whole idea of evolution on its head. This idea of like, actually, you have de-evolved from humans, right? By losing your personality. Anyway, that's the idea of collectivism. Collectivism is the idea of that we remove this ideology, this paradigm that God creates everything, and we are just meant to reflect His free will and all the other good aspects of God in ourselves. And by us all doing that together, that creates a unity in the world. They said, no, let's make a forced unity. Let's make a new paradigm, right? That we are literally just a collective. Individuals don't matter anymore. It's the ideology which is everything. We are nothing. Our individual personalities are meaningless, right? It's the job, it's the ideology, it's the communism, socialism, fascism, whatever form of, or globalism, whatever form of corruption and removal of God from the picture you want, and instead you want to make it a collective sort of like where you lose individual meaning, right? The individuals don't have any meaning anymore. So therefore, when they fell off the Tower of Babel, what happened, right? No, okay, someone died, not the end of the world, right? And that's why in communism is the most brutal, murderous ideology which has ever been witnessed. Yeah, in China, 50 plus million people died. Communist China under Mao, Stalin. That was it, 30 million, something ridiculous in the Second World War. He just said, we've got to win the war, so just send everyone. Don't care about the individuals. The main thing is that Mother Russia. That's the ideology. Communism survives, right? Right? What about the individual? Who are you doing it for? No, we're not doing it for the individual so they're happy. We're doing it because of our ideology. We want to remove God from the picture. That's the whole point. Right? And what about the individuals? We don't care about the individuals. We just care about not wanting God. It's a pure evil. It's just pure rebellion against God. Like globalism as well. That's the worst form of it. It's so hard to do this. Thankfully, they're failing quite badly, right? They are succeeding to an extent by a lot of turbulence in different countries, especially in the Western world now, because they've forced this open border idea, right, where nations lose their individuality, right? But what happens when they dropped a brick? They dropped a brick. That's terrible. That's our ideology. It's essential. Every brick is important. Because that's our meaning. The only meaning we have in life is the ideology. And when a brick breaks, they're mourning everything. Terrible. Right, that's the idea. Some beautiful ideas about the generation of the Tower of Babel, right? And God spread them out. And they lost their unity. They stopped building the town. Let's finish off now. Pashas Noach. Right, then it goes into 10 generations from Noach until Abraham. So Sham's the first generation. He's one of the three sons of Noach. He's the one. Shem means the name. That's why the Jewish people who descended from Shem are the ones who are connected with the essence of things, right? And then you have Arpachshad, Shelach, Aver, again, very righteous man. But remember, we spoke about in the Abraham lecture and some other lectures we mentioned, Shem and Aver were very spiritual, but they didn't want to connect to the physical world. They saw the physical world as dangerous, so they didn't. They were sort of like monks meditating on mountain tops, being separate from the physical world. Whereas Avraham, he said, no, you're missing the point. Yeah, of course, the physical world is dangerous, but ultimately the purpose of the physical world is in order to reveal God in the physical world, the holiness of the physical. That's the message of Abraham and the Jewish people ultimately. Right? But Shem and Ava, Shem means name, Ava means from the other side. Maybe you could say, I don't know, I've never seen this, but maybe the idea of the Ava means the other side. He's from on the other side of the universe. We're in the physical world here. Ava went beyond to Ovar, right? The spiritual dimension. He lived in a spiritual life, meditating, and in fact, the word Hebrew comes from the word Aver. Aver with the iron. Aver means the other side. So maybe Ivrit, right? Hebrew is the idea of that language, which is a transcendent language, which is a language which transcends this world, the spiritual language. So Ava was living a life of the spiritual language, you could say, right? Same idea. The other side. He didn't want to come down to this world. Avraham was the one who brought Lashon HaKodesh, the Hebrew, he brought God into the physical world. Right? And we explained this many times. Right, then you have Peleg, and the end of Peleg's life you had the men of the Peleg Niflige Haaretz, right? That Peleg literally means separation or dispersion. Because when he died, the year when he died, that's when the story which we spoke about today happened, about the men of the Tower of Babel. Then you have Re'u, Serug, Nochor, right? Nochor, and we finally have Terach, who's the father of three more famous figures: Avram, of course, Nochor, and Horon. I mean, Horon was the father of one of the matriarchs, Sarah. Sorry, we're going to see that in a second. Nochor was the father of Besuel, and we can see this much later in a few chapters. And Besuel was the father of Rebecca, Rivka. So basically, you have Abraham is the patriarch. Nochor and Horon were his two brothers, and from them you had two of the matriarchs. Interesting, right? And they all come from one source, Terach. The idea, I think we explained once before, why Terach merit to have these basically the whole Jewish people descended from him, right? All the matriarchs and patriarchs are all descendants from Terach. Right, when he was an idolater, we explained the idea because the idea of the Jewish people, we're a bold nation. We don't listen to other nations which say, no, don't listen, just serve idols like everyone else. We don't go with the flow. We do what's right, despite the fact that the world's telling us to do something different. The world can criticize the Jewish people, say you're being stupid, you're being evil, whatever. We know what's right. That's the idea, the brazenness of the Jewish people, a bold, brazen nation. That can be for the good, it can be for the bad. Because Terach was very brazen, because we're going to see next week, if I remember to mention it, or next lecture, the test of the fire of Ur-Kasdim. Avram, basically the whole story, with his father was an idol vendor, and one day Avram, realizing that it was all loads of rubbish, he smashed up all the idols in his father's shop, but he left one in the middle, and he took a hammer and he stuck it in the hand of this big idol, and his father Terach came and said, "What's going on here?" And he said, "Well, there was a fight between all the idols, who's the greatest, yeah?" And the one in the middle said, "No, I'm the biggest one, I'm the best." And he went and he smashed up all the idols, and Abraham and Terach told his father, told his son Avram, "What are you talking about? The idols can't move, they can't smash up the other idols." So Avram said, "So why are you serving them then?" And that was a really genius argument, yeah, because ultimately, you bang down to these things. They don't essentially have power on a deeper level. We'll speak about it next time, maybe, the deeper level. They don't, even the spiritual forces which they're meant to be, what's the word? Icons, right? The things which, these spiritual forces, these are icons which are meant to represent spiritual forces, right? Those spiritual forces themselves have no free will. They're basically just channels through which God channels his divine energy, right? So in Terach, great argument from his son Abraham. So what do? You repent, right? Obviously, right? No, Terach stubborn. I believe in my ways. I'm brazen. What does he do? He takes Abraham and he brings his own son Avram to Nimrod, who's by the way the one who initiated the Tower of Babel, right? So he's the enemy of God, and as we saw in the previous lecture, Nimrod was the one Nimrod Moired. He's the one who rebels against God. He knew how to trick people into doing his Tower of Babel idea, right? He could unify people there. He was charismatic. We spoke about that last time. Right? And he knew God and understood how to rebel against him. He's clever as well. Right? So Nimrod, Terach brought Avram to Nimrod, and he said, look, my son, he's rebelling against idolatry. Listen to this amazing argument he had, which is obviously wrong. It can't be right, obviously. So what are we going to do with him? Right? Let's throw him into the fire. Okay, fine. So they throw him into a fire, and miraculously he survives. He just walks around there, miraculously. And then he comes out. We can see in the Rashi in a minute now, the story. And he comes out, and yeah, he's totally fine. Miracle. So surely that means that Avram is right. What does Terach do? He said, oh, okay, that didn't work, right? Totally ignoring the fact that he gave a brilliant argument, and there's an open miracle which just performed to save Avram from the fire, right? And what do we do now with him? Well, we'll have to kill him another method, and Avram had to run away. That is some super level of stubbornness. You saw an open miracle proving Avram was correct, and logically he was correct, and you're still going with your stupidity, right? So that is the stubbornness of Terach. Terach stuck in his way. So the Jewish people have to be descended from a person who's got this characteristic of boldness and brazenness more than any other person, right? So the Jewish people can stand the test of time. Thousands of years we've been in exile, yeah. Nations of the world try to destroy us physically, spiritually, by attracting us to their ideologies. And we just stood strong, right? So found flaws in their arguments, or we just resisted their physical torture, or whatever it happened to be, right? Right, and the Jewish people are still going only because we've got this characteristic, and that was in Avraham, big time, right? So let's finish up now, and that's why we descended from Terach specifically, right? In fact, here we go. Rashi actually speaks out the whole story, right? And it says that Horon. Let's go to verse 28. And Horon died on the face of Terach Aviv, that means in his father's lifetime, in Ur Kasdim, which literally means the fire of Kasdim of Babylon. Kasdim is a place in Babylon, right? What does it mean? In the life of his father, the Medrash says that they had this whole test, and Horon was thinking to himself, well, I'm actually not sure, right? Should I go with Avram? Well, it's a bit dodgy. He's going to get chucked in the fire. I'll tell you what, right? So he thinks to himself, if Avram gets saved, then I'll go in, right? And if Avram gets burnt, I'll say, no, of course, Avram's speaking rubbish. Idols all the way, right? And what happens? They asked to Horon after the miracle, who are you? And he said, I'm going to be with, whose side are you going to be with? I said, I'm going to go with Avram's side. They threw him into the fire, and he got burnt because he was basically basing on logic. He wasn't putting his faith in God. He was just like hedging his bets, and that's not. You don't do miracles for that sort of commitment. That's not a commitment, right? And that's Ur Kasdim, right? Ur Kasdim, which literally means the fire of Kasdim, or Chaldees. Apparently, that's what it means. right? Or the Ur can mean the Bikar valley. Okay. And then the Avram and Noach took wives. They were both two daughters of Haran, so they married their nieces. Avram married Sarai, who's going to be Sarah, renamed later, Sarah. And Noach is going to marry Milcah, the other daughter of Haran, right? And Yisco, why is Sarah called Yisco? Yisco because she's Socha Baruch HaKodesh, or people look at her. That means she's got a spiritual element within her, the Holy Spirit within her. And also that people look at her beauty. That means her spirituality came out on the physical side as well. There was a perfect harmony between the spiritual and physical, which causes people to look beautiful, right? When you've got that radiance of spirituality coming out, right? Also, she was a princess because she was married to Abraham, or princedom, right? She didn't have children, and they all go out, or custom, right? And then eventually Terach dies many years later, and we learn, Rashi points out that he actually repented in the end. So however obstinate a person is, right, but eventually even someone like Horan can repent, so even more so anyone else in the world. If the most stubborn person in history, Terach, managed to repent, then yeah, there's hope for all of us. All right, thanks for listening, and that's the end of Pashas Noach. And next time we're going to go into chapter 12, which is the start of Pashas Lech Lecha, which literally means go for yourself. That's God telling. The first time we see God speaking to Avram, he said, "Go for yourself, leave your father's house, go to the place," and then the tests of Abraham start. Right, besides this one about the fire which happened beforehand. All right, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next lecture. Bye for now.